A very good evening to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and the current COVID scenario to attend our Asian Cardio Oncology monthly meeting. This is the fourth one that we are doing, trying to focus on cardio oncology in the Asian region. Without much ado, we have an exciting program lined up with one of the guest lectures by our foreign faculty, Dr. Avirup Guha, followed by a panel discussion. Without much ado, I would ask Kashish to start the proceedings and invite the chairpersons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It gives me great pleasure to invite our two chairpersons, Dr. Shirish Alukar, medical oncologist from Ahmedabad, and Dr. Anuprita Dadi, internal medicine specialist from Mumbai. Over to you, ma'am and sir.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone is keeping safe in given pandemic situation. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, who is going to talk on cardiotoxicity of androgen deprivation and anti-androgen therapy in prostate cancer. Dr. Avirup Guha is a clinical assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. He's cardiologist at University Hospitals, Ashland, USA. He received his medical degree from St. Z.S. Medical College, and he did his cardiology fellowship from Ohio State University, Wexner Medical Center. He has been in practice for more than 10 years. He has published more than 60 peer-reviewed manuscripts, scientific abstract, and book chapters. Dr. Guha is a peer reviewer for Journal of American Heart Association, Journal of American College of Cardiology, JACC Cardio-Oncology. Dr. Guha, I welcome you on behalf of everyone and request you to start your talk.
Thank you, Anuprita. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you, ACOS, for inviting me to present a recent paper which we published in the Journal of Urology. I'll try to focus it on the paper rather than the general topic, because I know there will be a lot of discussion afterwards. So I don't have any relevant disclosure to this talk. So this is just to remind everyone how the androgen deprivation therapy and what part of the endocrine cycle they work. So as you can see, GnRH agonists, which are sort of the oldest drugs in this group, are acting at the level of the hypothalamus and pituitary. And what they do is they increase GnRH levels, which then increase all of these. And then in a progressive negative feedback loop, the overall level of testosterone goes down, which is helpful in treatment of prostate cancer. And this is trying to simulate what orchiectomy would do at the level of testis. GnRH antagonists is much easier to understand because they would limit the amount of GnRH, which would then lead to reduction in testosterone, which would lead to the rest of the cycle remaining the same. A newer group of agents, androgen synthesis inhibitors, some of which is approved in the United States, abiraterone, works on a different pathway, which is the pathway which converts progesterone to testosterone. And it leads to androgen synthesis inhibition by adding abiraterone. Generally is added to other therapies up here in a combination to treat prostate cancer. And finally, there are agents, multiple of them, and these has been the most recent, most interesting agents which have been tested in clinical trials, which are androgen receptor blockade, directly working at the level of the androgen receptor and helping in treatment of prostate cancer. The study requires us to know a little bit about the mechanism of each of them so that we can understand why some of the adverse events are happening. And I wanted to give a shout out to one of our fellows who made this figure, which is published with me and Dr. Ghosh, who's also a member of ACOS in current treatment options of cardiology medicine. So this is the NCCN practice guidelines, and most oncologists around the world would be following these NCCN practice guidelines. I just put it in here because I just wanted to bring to attention that the attention to the adverse events, cardiology or otherwise, or rather internal medicine, has been pointed out just to this one statement, which is hidden in the entire guideline, which lasts about 80 to 90 pages. It reads that ADT has various adverse effects, including hot flashes, loss of libido, erectile dysfunction, shrinkage of penis and testicles, loss of muscle mass and strength, fatigue, depression, hair loss, osteoporosis, greater insulin clinical fraction. Then it starts obesity, insulin resistance, alteration of lipids, and greater risk for diabetes and cardiovascular disease, all summarized in 1-2 words. So going back to a very recent statement, this was actually just published, I think end of last month or early this month, which was in Circ Genomics and Precision Medicine by the AHA committee, which focused on the hormone receptor specific cancers, breast cancer and prostate cancer. And they had a very nice figure which summarizes what might be happening with androgen deprivation therapy, which leads to some of the effects mentioned in the NCCN guideline. So androgen deprivation therapy causes hypogonadism, obviously, by reducing the effect of androgens on androgen receptors. And eventually, it has threefold effects. It leads to altered body composition by increasing BMI, reducing lean mass, and increasing fat mass. It also leads to lipid abnormalities, which leads to increased triglycerides, increased LDL, and increased HDL. And it leads to impaired glycemic control by reducing insulin sensitivity, increasing fasting glucose, and increasing A1C. What all these three does is creates a metabolic derangement and a metabolic syndrome, and creates a pro-inflammatory milieu with increased cytokines and prothrombotic markers, which leads to vascular endothelial dysfunction, vascular inflammation, and reduced coronary flow reserve, eventually leading to atherosclerosis and very arterial vascular disease. The key word was arterial vascular disease because that is sort of the premise of our paper. The reason why, or rather the premise of why this is important, is because of this very recent New England Journal of Medicine paper, where there was a comparison, and this wasn't meant to be a cardiovascular comparison, but this was to compare an antagonist to an agonist in 930 prostate adenocarcinoma patients. This is one part of a second or third table where we see that MACE events, major adverse cardiovascular events, were much lower in those who received relugolix, and this was 2-to-1 randomization, compared to leuprolide, which obviously sparked this discussion. This was followed up by multiple meta-analysis of various observational and randomized trials. And this was one published by Dr. Leong from McMaster and Dr. Dan Lenihan, who's a chairperson of International Cardio-Oncology Society. And we see that cardiovascular events and cardiovascular death was lower in GnRH antagonists compared to agonists. This was seen across many clinical trials considered in these meta-analysis. This was a table put together again by another recent review, which we were a part of, where we tried to compile the reported cardiovascular events in randomized control trials and meta-analysis. And you see across the board, GnRH agonists have higher levels of CVD adverse events compared to GnRH antagonists. So we thought that we might be able to generate some original data. So the aim of the study, we aim to characterize the cardiovascular risk profile of hormone therapies used to treat prostate cancer, including GnRH agonist, antagonist, androgen receptor antagonist, androgen synthesis inhibitors using the Food and Drug Administration's Adverse Event Reporting System, or FAERS. It's a pharmacovigilance data set, but people from around the world can report into it, so it's not US specific. This is how the FAERS dashboard looks like. If you go to the FAERS website and go to the public dashboard, it has data which you can play with and actually generate your own figures for simple, one of you is giving a presentation, you can very easily go and find a specific drug, see what its adverse events are. And these are all adverse events with all systems. I think they include about 19 to 20 organ systems, and they have a very rich set of adverse events which are reported. One thing to note is there is no denominator, so you have to be very careful of how you analyze this data. These are all adverse events, so you don't know how many of patients were prescribed and then how many of them had the adverse event. So this was a table 1 of our manuscript, where we saw that a lot of these patients, and I'm pointing to the important part of table 1. And one thing to notice first is the table 1 is short because this data set has only as many data points, but has a lot of data points of specific patients or reports. So the most common age group was, as you think, 60 to 79 years old. Most common reports happened from 2014 to 2020, talking more about the importance of cardio-oncology in this era. Then the reporting source, interestingly, was most likely pharmaceutical companies, but there were a fair bit of reports from healthcare professionals as well. And the reaction type serious was much more in those receiving combination therapies versus monotherapies. One question which a reviewer actually asked during writing the paper was, what do you mean by monotherapy? Many of us are using only combination therapies for prostate cancer. So this was, given this was a 20-year span study, a lot of the patients were on GnRH agonist monotherapy before 2014, when a lot of changes happened in the way prostate cancer medications were prescribed. Um, and as you note here, hospitalization rate was about 50% in monotherapy compared to 66.5% in combination therapy. Death was much lower. So this was the table 2, where we reported cardiovascular adverse events. What we did, just because we did not have a true baseline of total number of patients who were prescribed this medication, we created the GnRH agonist group as a baseline. And what we report is called a reporting odds ratio. Basically, we compare the odds ratio of reporting of a specific event or a cardiovascular event compared to all events in this group. So for example, over here, GnRH antagonist had number of cardiovascular events 173, of the total number of events 1250. So if you put it in a 4x4 table and calculate odds ratio, you would find compared to GnRH agonist, you can put these 4 numbers in a 4x4 table and find an odds ratio. The odds ratio was lower with GnRH antagonist. This was in line with what has been seen in the randomized controlled trial and the meta-analysis, which I just showed before. But the surprising thing was that was not true with the case with first generation AR agonist. This was the first time somebody was showing this. So AR antagonist, first generation, but second generation AR antagonist, it was the opposite signal. And with abiraterone, it was a significant signal, but more towards the direction of how GnRH antagonist and AR antagonist was. So as you see, the adjusted odds ratios are pointed out here, higher for AR, first generation AR antagonist, and lower for second generation antagonist and GnRH antagonist and abiraterone. This is adjusted odds ratio for the variables we saw in table 1. So just go back to table 1. These are the variables I could adjust for. So the next thing and this is for monotherapy. So these are for patients where the adverse event report was from one agent. Again, a lot of argument was made about how second generation antagonists almost never prescribed by themselves. And all of that's understood, but this was, again, retrospective thought-provoking research rather than a randomized controlled trial. So this was the second analysis where we looked at combination therapies. And this was, again, more welcome from the peer reviewers who are practicing urologists and uro-oncologists, where we compared reports of adverse events with combination of antagonist to agonist, where we changed the combination. First comparison was with any combination. Second comparison was this first generation androgen receptor antagonist, second generation receptor antagonist, and abiraterone. The interesting thing was across the board, any combination with GnRH antagonist was led to a lower risk of cardiovascular adverse events compared to any combination with GnRH agonist. Except in abiraterone, and I think that is more from the size of the cohort we have compared to the cohorts here. As you notice, the numbers are much higher than the numbers are lower. And these are the adjusted odds ratios and the p-values over here. So this is the figure 1 of the manuscript, where we take specific cardiovascular adverse events, and I'll take some time going over this and explaining this figure in details. So the top part of this figure is major groups of adverse events. So this is arterial vascular events, venous thromboembolism, heart failure, and arrhythmia, which is QT prolongation. And we'll mention why we talked about these two in a little bit. And then we split the arterial vascular events as they were more common into hypertension requiring hospitalization, coronary artery disease MI, ischemic stroke, and peripheral artery disease. The stars over here are basically comparing events in monotherapy arms of the 4 other groups: GnRH antagonist, ARA, first generation and second generation, and abiraterone, to GnRH agonists. So if there's a star, that means the p-value is less than 0.05 and odds ratio is less than 1, which means the chances of reporting odds ratio, or the chances of having an event, is lower. And if there is a hash, that hash means the chances of events are higher and the p-value is less than 0.05 or significant. Now let's look at specific events. So we see that with arterial vascular events are lower almost across the board in GnRH antagonist, in first generation, in second generation ARAs, and abiraterone as monotherapy compared to GnRH agonist. When it comes to heart failure, the reason we considered heart failure is it's more important from the standpoint of how patients present to the hospital. Mechanistically, it's difficult to explain why one should be studying heart failure in prostate cancer patients. but this is maybe a final presentation which might be mediated by arterial vascular events. This data set is unable to answer that question. However, we did find that the first generation ARAs had a higher reporting odds ratio compared to GnRH agonist. And then we looked at arrhythmias and QT prolongation. Now, the reason why we looked at arrhythmias and QT prolongation is that there was a paper maybe a couple of years ago by colleagues from Vanderbilt, where they studied effects of first generation ARAs in cells, in cardiac cells, where they showed that some of them prolonged QT, which leads to, has a possibility or a theoretical possibility of arrhythmias. And we'll have a discussion afterwards to see if it's actually seen in practice. But the reporting odds ratio was higher compared to GnRH agonists in first generation androgen receptor antagonists. Compared to, and specific, when we split these arterial vascular events to these other events over here, we see that hypertension requiring hospitalization was actually higher in abiraterone and second generation ARAs compared to GnRH agonist, which is interesting because that's another part of research which is never conducted or thought of, because obviously people think of MI, ischemic stroke, heart failure sort of major events. That is the focus of studies. But now more and more focus has been given to sort of events which are risk factors rather than just final endpoints which are noted in clinical trials. The coronary artery disease and MI was lower in the same groups as noted here in arterial vascular events compared to GnRH agonists. And heart failure events was lower in second generation ARA and abiraterone compared to GnRH agonist, showing that ischemic stroke rates are lower and CAD-MI rates are lower in these two agents. And most likely these two agents tend to be used now compared to the older agents. So this is the second figure where we looked at the combination therapies. Here we made the figure a little differently based on what the reviewers had asked for. So we had all cardiovascular events, arterial vascular events, venous thromboembolism, heart failure, and QT prolongation. And we kept this top figure simple, where we had GnRH agonist in any combination to GnRH antagonist in any combination. And we saw that all cardiovascular events was lower, as we saw earlier in GnRH antagonist group in any combination. And arterial vascular events was also lower, and QT prolongation was also lower. Then we split the discussion into comparison with all cardiovascular events. And this is essentially the table 2, which I had shown earlier, where we compared GnRH antagonist to agonist to the various combinations, specific combinations we see. So here we see that in specific, which I wanted to point out, was that heart failure was higher in the GnRH antagonist group compared to GnRH agonist in patients who are receiving a combination of GnRH antagonist with second generation ARAs and androgen synthesis inhibitor. We have a hypothesis that the androgen synthesis inhibitor might be leading to increased volume or salt retention, which might be causing these heart failure events. Again, this is thought-provoking, hypothesis generating, but rather needs to be studied in a prospective manner. And similarly, when we looked at QT prolongation, we saw that the group of GnRH antagonists with second generation ARA was safer in terms of QT prolongation compared to GnRH agonists with second generation ARAs. So basically, we concluded that GnRH antagonists were associated with fewer reports of cardiovascular adverse events than GnRH agonists, both as monotherapy and as combination therapy. Arterial vascular events accounted for most reported cardiovascular adverse events, and they reported more commonly with GnRH agonists, monotherapy and combination therapy. Second generation ARAs and abiraterone were associated with fewer reports of coronary artery disease, ischemic stroke, and PVD than GnRH agonist, but more reports of hypertension requiring hospitalization and heart failure. So this was a table which was taken from the first review article, where we had actually listed a lot of research questions or future directions of what we need to study. The table is much longer, but I put in 3 sections of the table, and I was happy to see that we tried to answer some of them. Specifically, the one in the center, where specific hormonal therapy cardiotoxicity, where we tried to look at different combinations in comparison to the baseline of GnRH agonist was something which had never been conducted before, although it was retrospective and had many limitations, as you would notice already. The other important fact which we pointed out is things like hypertension requiring hospitalization was an event, and that leads to a fact about cardiac risk factor modification in prostate cancer patients receiving androgen deprivation therapy, which was another research question of the future. And then the final thing was optimal prostate cancer treatment choice. This research was thought-provoking from the standpoint of conducting clinical trials and in practice where you know what the patient has as a baseline. For example, if you have a 70-year-old gentleman with prostate cancer who comes in, who has hypertension and diabetes and may have coronary artery disease, would you choose a different combination compared to other, given that the clinical trials most likely give you results which include patients who do not have any of these conditions? So this led to us designing this. This is less relevant to the subcontinent. This is more relevant to the United States. But this is a disparities cohort where we compare disparities based on race in prostate cancer management. However, the interesting part of this is when how we are following up these patients, and I'll give you a reason of why we are following with them. So we take at least intermediate risk prostate cancers. We randomize them to 4 groups, non-Caucasian, Caucasian, and when we have a positive control of radiotherapy and negative control of no androgen deprivation therapy, and these are patients who are just being monitored. And then we have patients who come to our clinic, the cancer clinic first. They get enrolled into the cardio-oncology clinic. They get, in their visit 1, they get some baseline workup, which is in line with what is the ABCDE, and I'll show this again. And then they get to the, they come in every 4 to 6, they come in 4 to 6 weeks, then they come at 3 to 4 months, and then they come at 6 to 8 months. And then the study closes at 4 years, where we basically have a hypothesis or seen in retrospective studies again that most events happen in the first 6 to 8 months, and once they cross that threshold, they're generally safe. So we do risk stratification with ABCDE during this time, and hopefully we'll see a difference specific to this study based on race, but we'll also probably see a difference anyways compared to people who are not having aggressive management. So this is the take home from this. This was a figure from European Heart Journal where it's which was published in 2019, but it clearly shows that prostate cancer patients are more likely to die at a 200-month, which is many years after diagnosis follow-up from cardiovascular event, which is in green here, than orange here. And this is the ABCD algorithm. This is again, thanks to Courtney for making this such a beautiful figure. The ABCDE algorithms, A stands for awareness of cardiovascular disease, aspirin use, and arrhythmias, which was added on by our colleagues from Vanderbilt. The B stands for blood pressure management and biomarkers. And we didn't study biomarkers in our study, but there is ongoing studies for biomarkers. And there has been a thought-provoking research of using biomarkers used for prostate cancer staging as also biomarkers for cardiovascular staging. C stands for cigarette use or smoking counseling. And then C also stands for cholesterol management and also calcium scoring. Luckily, work for university hospitals where calcium scoring is free. So almost all patients who come to our cardio-oncology clinic get a free calcium score. D stands for dietary management and diabetes control, and also the drug choice. And the drug choice was a major finding from our study where we obviously show that there is difference in adverse events based on the type of drugs you choose or a combination of drugs we choose for prostate cancer androgen deprivation therapy. E stands for exercise and EKG and the length of exposure. We could not measure the length of exposure, obviously, because of the nature of the data set we used, but that's another front to see whether the medication which is being given, although it causes differential adverse events, whether it's related to the exposure length, because many of these patients are on these medications for a long period of time. So I would like to thank my parents, my wife, my mentors, and collaborators from around the country who's made this research possible. Thank you, and I'll take questions now.
Do we take the questions now, or is there a panel after this?
So we can take the questions now, sir.
Okay, so Yeah, that's fantastic and really mind-blowing. I never knew there are so many intricacies of ADD therapy as far as the cardiac toxicities were concerned. Just one question to ask you that testosterone is known to shorten the QTC interval, QT interval. So if you do go for an orchidectomy, is it more dangerous than say a complete androgen blockade? That's what some of the literature, very little literature which I read across. Could you please throw some light on that? So, in other words, because in an Indian setting, orchidectomy is much better. I mean, cheaper and in a way is better.
So I think the biological phenomenon of creating androgen deprivation, whatever the technique may lead to QT prolongation, but that might be subclinical, or rather will not matter as long as the patient is not receiving other QT prolonging agents. So based on our study and recommendations, which colleagues who have done other research in prostate cancer field, the recommendation would be to get a baseline EKG and then to follow them clinically to see if they're having any changes in QT prolongation, in QT changes. Now the problem arises when they receive medications which are not under the oncologist or the cardiologist control. For example, they have pneumonia, or they have, I mean, in India, a lot of antibiotics are used without prescription sometimes, and that may prolong QTC. So what I would say is it is almost a thought-provoking practice where you can suggest to the patient that this is what might happen. So whenever you start an antibiotic, please let us know.
Right.
But
so
I
one
mean,
question is, yeah,
I think a true baseline follow-up is required to see how many patients have true clinical events, you know, because another thing to remember in the field of cardiology is to not stop medications or not inhibit cancer therapy unnecessarily.
Okay. So if I can take one question from the chat box from Dr. Govind Babu, he has asked that should we totally avoid agonists because they're known to apparently have more cardiac toxicity? Should we change our practice to an antagonist?
You know, the true metal of any study or any follow-up, or to make a solid statement, you need a randomized controlled trial. The PRONOUNCE study, which is ongoing by the Duke Clinical Research Institute, is actually studying that exact question. It is studying combinations of various agonists versus antagonists. The study design was published in JACC Cardio Oncology last year, I believe. The first author was Chiara Meloni. And that study would lead to more randomized and true information about what is happening. If you derive from clinical trials, you'd see that there is evidence that antagonists are less toxic. Now, also, we have to remember the efficacy of cancer treatment. So you have to think of sort of three things: event-free survival, progression-free survival, and overall survival. As long as we are having less event-free survival and not changing the overall survival, then it would be probably wise to use antagonist-based therapy than agonist-based therapy.
Okay. Something new, yeah. One question by Dr. Randeep Singh is, do we have data to combine degarelix with abiraterone or enzalutamide, or relugulix with abiraterone enzalutamide?
That's actually a great question. That was a group which I was seeing more frequently than I would expect in the FAIRS registry. We did not report it because there was no guideline-directed or clinical trial-directed use of it. So maybe people were using it in combination because they have seen this data. They thought it would be less toxic, so they may end up using. And since it's a patient and clinical data set where people can report any events of any combinations, I did see that, but we didn't study it to report. So I would imagine if there's clinical trials done and it gets some form of approval, because off-the-shelf use directly for patient care may be done at a patient and a physician level, but not using data currently.
So one more question by Dr. Tagore is, what about any toxicity if you add bone-modifying agents with an ADT? Does it add to the toxicity? Does it have any significance?
That's a great question. We were never really asked that question. We could have potentially studied that because some of the information which we get from FAIRS has information about their medications for osteoporosis. As far as we know, osteoporosis agents are relatively safe cardiac-wise. So there was really never a thought to study that, but good question.
So do we have time, Kashish?
So we've overshot by a minute.
Okay, fine. So I think thank you very much, and I and Dr. Anuprita would like to give it back to you, Kashish, and maybe we'll have a panel discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll now move on to our second session. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our chairperson, Dr. Amit Joshi, who is a medical oncologist from Mumbai. Over to you, sir.
So first I should thank Dr. Purvis sir and Dr. Vivek for taking the awareness, because we are dealing with this cardiac problem, hypertension for last 3-4 years, but we don't have such platform. So I think they have started a very, very good initiative, which will have definitely impact on coming years, and even our newer generation, the resident, they are aware that this type of entity is there, and I think involving the cardiologist in this is very, very helpful. So they are also aware that this problem exists. So I think without wasting time, I will invite the moderator of this session, Dr. Vivek Ragwal, to take the session, and he will also invite the panelists for discussion. Dr. Vivek.
Thank you, sir, for encouraging us. We'll straight ahead move ahead with our panel discussion on androgen deprivation therapy, anti-androgen therapy in prostate cancer and the cardiovascular toxicities. We have an elite panel of senior urologists among us, uro-oncologists, Dr. Prabjot Singh from AIMS and Dr. Hemant Tongaonkar from Mumbai, Dr. Deepak Dapkara, who is medical oncologist from TMC, and Dr. Krishna Kumar Ratnam, medical oncologist from Mysore, and Dr. Shilendra Shakya, who is cardiologist from Nepal, and Dr. Muthia Subramaniam, who is also a cardiologist. So we'll start with our panel. So the problem statement is very clear that prostate cancer is the second most common cancer among men. And the data says that they have a very high 5-year survival, very long survivals. The main reason is they are detected early in the West, mostly by PSA testing, which is also very common now in India. And then we have very effective systemic hormonal therapy, including the novel anti-androgens. So survival is high, and because of this high survival, they are very, very, susceptible for cardiovascular disease. Being a disease of the old age, most patients already have cardiovascular disease, and it is not uncommon that the leading cause of death and mortality in these prostate cancer patients is actually a cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular event. So we don't see patients of prostate cancer usually dying by bleeding or dying by disease progressions and dying by respiratory difficulties, dying by, we see them dying mostly by a cardiovascular event. So because this is a cardio, so we have to sort of treat the prostate cancer, but keep in mind this cardiovascular issue. We have a strong hormonal therapy armamentarium with castration by various medical surgical techniques, androgen receptor blockers. And then we combine them to have a complete androgen blockade. And then we have a testosterone synthesis inhibitor. And straight away, these are the expected toxicities. So we all know that in surgical castration or medical castration, we have diabetes, myocardial infarctions, as well as coronary heart diseases, metabolic syndrome, and I think Dr. Aviru clearly highlighted what are the toxicities. It is the atherosclerosis, which actually leads, and there is the metabolic inflammation that he has already shown. These are the various mechanisms. I won't be wasting much time. Again, when you go to androgen receptor antagonists, there is also peripheral edema, more hypertension, some QT prolongation that actually also comes in with few of the drugs, and vasodepressor syncope, which is also something which we are seeing additionally with the androgen receptor antagonists. And if you look at the testosterone synthesis inhibitor, we see that there is an additional salt retention or peripheral edema, fluid retention because of the mineral corticoid deficiency. There is hypokalemia, and that is why we have to supplement prednisolone. And then there are the newer ones, the newer anti-androgens, and we see some sudden cardiac deaths. We see QT prolongation, and we do see peripheral edemas and hypertension. So let us straight ahead come with our case. So there is a 70-year-old gentleman who is diagnosed now with a high risk prostate cancer with bone metastasis, and he has already hypertension, diabetes, and a coronary artery disease with a PCI done 3 years ago. And he is currently in a good fitness, good state. So how should we approach the management? And I'll start with our urologist, because this is a situation which most often they diagnose. So, the basic concept that we go ahead with in the cardio oncology is that there should be a baseline risk assessment, and then we start the oncological management. And we monitor them, and we look at the prevention and management strategies. So how will you proceed with the pre-treatment cardiac evaluation of this patient? Dr. Tongankar.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah.
I think, since the last 5 years or so, I have started referring all these patients who are elderly with metastatic prostate cancer to my cardiology clinic. And the cardiologist who's there will usually assess these patients for any baseline cardiac or other problems also. Because, sometimes we need to change our treatment as per the cardiac risk. And this is only since the last 5 years. Before that, the only thing we used to get done was probably an ECG and nothing more. But now there's a more focus on the cardiac evaluation. And I usually refer all my patients to cardiologists now. Those who are above the age of 65, yes.
Okay. So, Dr. Prabjot, what about your practice? And if you are referring to the cardiologist, are you referring all the patients before starting any androgen deprivation therapy, or you risk stratify them and you select which patients to refer to cardiologist, which patient to not refer?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Vivek. What we practice here is if the patient having like pre-existing cardiovascular disease, like this patient had a PCI 3 years back, on those patients we refer them to the cardiologist, and we offer them the GnRH antagonist straight away to these patients. And we do baseline ECG and echo, which will be done by the cardiologist, and also lipid profile. And then we ask them to follow up regularly with their cardiologist also. But we also change our management in the depending upon the what cardiac disease he's having is, we change our hormone therapy.
Okay.
One of the reasons, sorry.
Yes, sir.
One of the reasons why we started referring all the patients to cardiologists is to get a baseline data. We don't have any data from India. This is one way to ensure that we get some data on the baseline cardiac problems in these patients.
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach, sir. Dr. Deepak, suppose this patient lands up with you. So would you actually wait for the cardiology workup to proceed, or you start the treatment and then you'd look at the results? And what is your approach? Dr. Deepak? Dr. Deepak Dapkara is there?
Deepak, so you'll have to unmute your mic, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So Vivek, most of these patients, they are already under some cardiological evaluation. They already have been consulting either a general physician or a cardiologist. So in my practice, I see most of them, more than 90% patients are under some cardiologist. If they are not, then I will refer to cardiologist. And
sir, do you start the treatment right away, or you first write a workup for them and then look at the workup and then decide?
I normally start the treatment.
Okay. And does the result of the cardiac evaluation affect your choice of treatment, or you later decide on modifying the treatment, or you think that probably your treatment doesn't change. I mean, whatever be the cardiac risk, the treatment doesn't change. What is your practice?
No, the treatment changes. Suppose the patient has a ejection fraction of 45%, then my this hormonal treatment as well as AR targeted therapy will change, might change.
Okay. So, okay, fair enough, sir. Dr. Krishna Kumar, sir, what is your opinion? Whether you start treatment right away or you wait for the cardiology results and the cardiology opinion? Because many of these patients don't have a baseline evaluation.
True. What happens is, see, the center where I work is a full-time center with an in-house, since it's a teaching hospital. Most of the time, they go through a loop of evaluation. They come back probably the next day with all the opinions in place. So here is a patient who was a CAD, from what I'm able to see in the case history with a 3-year back PCI done. I think they would be probably under a cardiologist for a stable follow-up. So if they're already under cardiac medications, we just get it ratified by the in-house cardiologist and then we start off the treatment. So I have not seen this as a limiting factor or a delay in starting any treatment for my patients.
Okay. I think fair enough. If you get to our cardiologist, Dr. Muthaiah, sir, such patient referred to you for a cardiology follow-up, or maybe any patient. I mean, let us consider a patient who doesn't have any cardiac comorbidities, and you are getting this patient. Somebody is referred to you that they are starting androgen deprivation therapy, something which is going to cause hypogonadism. So how do you approach to evaluate such patients, sir?
All right, thank you, Vivek. So the thing with these kind of patients are, when we know that they are being started on a specific kind of oncology medicine, in this case anti-androgen therapy, our evaluation is often tailored to these patients. So here we are talking about patients who are at higher risk or potentially future higher risk of coronary artery disease. So we need to evaluate these patients' coronary artery disease slightly more stringently than we would a normal patient. And this and evaluation of this coronary artery disease starts with the risk factors also for coronary artery disease. So their blood pressure, whether it's under control, their glycemic control, and their cholesterol profile are all important risk factors, because here it looks like the anti-androgens are in fact increasing the risk of these risk factors to cause the coronary artery disease. So this is one thing that to take into consideration. Second thing is evaluation of coronary artery disease itself. We would at least ask for a baseline ECG, echocardiogram, and based on the patient's functional class, if needed, a treadmill test before giving clearance for anti-androgen therapy. And I think, like we've been hearing in the chat box, it's very important to work with our oncologists and have serial evaluations of these patients before, just after starting treatment, and maybe at periods of 6 months to 1 year, to see how these investigations change. Because at least in our practice, we see that a change in an investigation is as important as an initial finding of an investigation. So,
yeah. Dr.
Vivek,
Shilen, to add to any of this, what has been said? Anything specific more that you want to add?
Vivek, can I add something?
Yeah, yes, sir. Please, sir.
So the other only thing which we have realized that when we refer any patient to the cardiologist, patient who are already been well settled, they ask that why you need to follow right now. So I think there is a need to tease sensitize the cardiology community that this is a separate entity, separate thing which have its own importance. So like a medical oncologist, we are aware that definitely this is a thing which need to be taken care of. Similarly, the teaching program for a DM cardiology or any other forum like this, they should have a more workshop or something more session pertaining to this, that what as a medical oncologist, what we want, why we are referring these patients, what are the real issues for that. So I think the Cardiology Society of India, or they should have some sort of some session regarding that, and the teaching program should have some sort of focus on the cardio-oncology also.
Yeah. So, sir, I think cardio-oncology, I think as a whole is coming up among the cardiologists, and with such kind of initiatives and more collaboration, probably that is when we are going to have more of our cardiologists being sensitized to our issues, as well as we being more sensitized to the cardiological issues also. So it is a two-way thing. Probably it will take time, but probably this small initiative that we have had is going to go in a
yes,
long way.
National conferences, or we should try to get one session so that we, as a cardio oncology society, we can have some say on that what we need. I think that
So
maybe.
Dr. Mutia, I mean, just off the track, but what is your opinion on what our chairperson has said? I mean, cardio oncology among the cardiologists.
So I agree totally with what he's saying, because the fact is, when we have a patient for an oncology workup, often the first thing that we do is just an ECG echo. And then rather than looking at the specific kind of therapy or what the course of the chemotherapy may be for this patient, we'll give a general fitness, which is not very different than a fitness for a surgical procedure. So it's we also need to be completely sensitized to what kind of adverse effects for what kind of drugs, and we could tailor our workup for these patients accordingly. So these kind of sessions are very important for us also to understand about these medications and what specific toxicities to look for.
Correct. So just in the topic, I just wanted to bring all of your attention into this European Society of Cardiology position paper in 2020 published, where they looked at the baseline risk assessment for all kinds of oncological treatment, a baseline cardiovascular risk stratification. And when you look at the baseline risk stratification for androgen deprivation therapies, so they want to classify the patient's baseline into a high, medium, and low based on the clinical risk scores. And this risk score is telling you what is the 10-year risk of getting a cardiovascular disease or an event. So if the risk is less than 10%, they are low risk patients. If there is between 10 to 20%, they are medium risk patients. And if the risk is high, then more than 20% risk, then they are called high risk patients. And if we are actually risk stratifying our patients, then probably it becomes easy for us to draw algorithms in our OPD as to how to manage, how frequently to see, and what prevention strategies to use. And they are using some commonly used atherosclerotic related cardiovascular risk calculators which are given there. And probably these are small things that we can include in our OPD evaluation in order to classify our patients as per what is the cardiovascular risk status of this patient when we are starting the treatment. So appropriate oncological management. So let us again go back to Dr. Hemant. Sir, for this patient, when we are starting oncological management, what is the appropriate oncological management? What would you see, and why? Why do you choose that?
Now, this patient you said has a high risk metastatic prostate cancer. Now, the trend is to give androgen deprivation therapy plus add either docetaxel chemotherapy or abiraterone or enzalutamide to these patients.
Correct, sir. Correct.
Okay. So,
how would you choose to give your androgen deprivation therapy? I think Dr. Prabjot earlier only said he wants to go ahead with the antagonist only. What is your opinion, sir?
I think so. If the patient has a significant cardiac risk, I would choose antagonist over agonist. Or if there is issues about the compliance because they require monthly injections or the cost, then orchiectomy would be my choice.
Okay. Again, Dr. Deepak, I mean, if the patient comes to you, what would be your choice for androgen deprivation?
My choice will be among these two, GnRH antagonist or orchiectomy.
Okay, so you don't want to use the analogs. I mean, in the chat box, Dr. Randeep was also asking that do we have a level 1 evidence to say that analogs are more cardiotoxic?
We do not have a level 1 evidence, but whatever evidence is there, and with this condition, diabetic, hypertensive, had a cardiac problem, I would like to use GnRH antagonist.
Yeah. Dr. Prabjot, just asking an interesting question. I mean, can there be a scope for using an anti-androgen alone? Suppose this patient has a low risk metastatic prostate cancer. So would you, with a high cardiovascular risk, so would you want to use an anti-androgen alone because, taking the cardiovascular risk into account and the least cardiovascular toxicity?
if you see oncological results of giving only anti-androgen, there was a study uh, about the bicalutamide given 50 mg TID versus ADT. So they found the oncologically it is much inferior with the more side effect as compared to the ADT. So uh, till now there are no other studies giving alone abiraterone or enzalutamide comparing to the ADT alone. Only we have a study of bicalutamide. So in future we will see more trials if we find that it is there other therapies are superior to ADT. Till now the ADT is the standard of care.
So anyone in the panel who would actually want to go with the GnRH analog? So I think everybody wants to use the GnRH antagonist only. So I think all wants to use GnRH, and this is I just took it from a systematic review which looked at all the important data regarding the GnRH analogs as well as the orchiectomy. And what I could summarize from this was that the most cardiovascular risk was found with the complete androgen blockade, where they combined a GnRH analog with an anti-androgen, followed by a GnRH analog, and which followed by a GnRH antagonist. And the least cardiovascular risk was actually with orchiectomy and or an anti-androgen alone. But again, as Dr. Prabjot said, that the basic premise of cardio-oncology is to give, be able to give a good treatment to the patient with good outcomes, and trying to mitigate the cardiovascular risks actually. And a continuous GnRH analog was something which was found to be having more cardiotoxicity as compared to an intermittent GnRH analog. So again, coming to Dr. Hemant, sir, ever using intermittent GnRH analogs to decrease cardiovascular toxicity and have equivalent outcome?
If you look at the only published trial of continuous versus intermittent androgen ablation in metastatic prostate cancer, it is the SWOG trial. And the SWOG trial showed that it was non-inferiority trial, and the intermittent androgen ablation was not found to be not inferior. So it was actually, there was a risk of reduced survival by more than a year if you use the intermittent androgen ablation. So unless there is a very, very strong cardiac history or cardiac risk, I would not give intermittent GnRH or intermittent androgen ablation. Yeah. Yes, the risk of cardiac toxicity may be a little less, but if you look at the SWOG data, there was not much difference at all.
Correct.
So I would only, in an individual patient with a very high cardiac risk, I may think of intermittent androgen ablation, not as a routine.
Correct. So high cardiac risk, there may be a scope, but not routinely because it reduces survival. I think Dr. Hemant was very spot on. Regarding cardiovascular disease incidence, what can be summarized is that it was found to be around 3.6% with the analogs and 1.6% with the antagonist. This was a result of one of the meta-analysis. And what was found is that the presence of a pre-existing cardiovascular disease, a patient who is a known cardiovascular disease, it is one of the highest risk factor for a cardiovascular event. So patients may have different risks, but if they have a pre-existing cardiovascular disease, this has the highest risk. Again, we were discussing about the data, whether a randomized data, a very class 1 evidence is there or not. But if you look at all these studies, what we'll see is that there are a lot of different types of data: observational studies, randomized trials, and there are retrospective trials. And what we have to understand is that none of these randomized trials actually had cardiovascular disease or event as one of the outcomes, or nor these studies were actually powered. So we would actually need something like the PRONOUNCE study, which looks at specifically not the oncological outcome, but the cardiovascular outcome. And we do have a very heterogeneous population with respect to the baseline cardiovascular disease status. And we also know that patients who had cardiovascular diseases, frank diseases, were actually not included in the trials. So that is why it is very difficult to interpret these data to reach a level 1 evidence. Now let us imagine this, we have to add something to this androgen deprivation therapy. So I would come to Dr. Krishna Kumar. Sir, what would you add to this patient? Let us assume patient doesn't want chemotherapy, so we did not discuss about docetaxel. But what would you choose, with respect to abiraterone or enzalutamide?
So I would go ahead with, see, once again, this is a high risk cardiovascular disease patient. And along with my deprivation, would probably enzalutamide may be a choice. You can skip the prednisolone and off late with the cost cut which has been there, most enzalutamide, and we are very comfortable using this drug. I have started using more of enzalutamide off late.
Okay, but in all patients of cardiovascular disease, or you want to further investigate them and understand?
See, just in the context in which we are discussing, I presume the ECG has been done and patient's QTC is okay and patient's ejection fraction is okay. See, once again, with abiraterone, I would be, a bit worried about the fluid retention. Yes, we are giving steroids, we are taking care of the mineralocorticoid effects and all that. But still,
I think we have to be fast a bit.
Yeah, some patients are going to be, even on 5 milligram of prednisolone, we do see issues.
Correct,
so because of that, off late I've started preferring enzalutamide.
Yeah, Dr. Deepak, what is your choice? What would you choose among abiraterone and enzalutamide?
My choice will be enzalutamide for this patient.
Okay, and even if this patient has a normal 60% ejection fraction, then also, or you would be very happy to choose it in less ejection fraction?
No, if it is ejection fraction of 60%, then my choice can be both, either abiraterone or enzalutamide.
So you feel that ejection, if the patient has normal ejection fraction, then probably abiraterone will have less toxicity?
Not less toxicity. Abiraterone in any case will be having higher toxicity. Okay. There is some meta-analysis also which has mentioned that hypertension is with both abiraterone as well as enzalutamide, but other cardiac events are more with abiraterone.
Yeah. So again, a busy slide, but just to summarize, what is enzalutamide? That there is 4 to 7% grade 3-4 hypertension when higher than what you are using with placebo. Atrial fibrillation was 4% versus 2%. All grade hypertension 10 to 12%. Major cardiac disease incidence with enzalutamide is 5 to 8%. And the toxicity is again higher risk in patients who have pre-existing cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, and age more than 75. So these are patients probably where they have higher toxicity. And when you look at abiraterone, again 31% fluid retention, 17% hypokalemia and associated ECG abnormalities and all, 2% atrial fibrillation, 22% hypertension. But what about LVEF decline? Dr. Deepak, abiraterone leading to LVEF decline. We all know the study did not include patients who had less ejection fraction. But have you seen LVEF decline with abiraterone or frank heart failure?
No, I have not seen.
Yeah, but there is the incidence and there is reported in heart failure on abiraterone. But this is something that I have not found in the trials as to reporting of LVEF decline, actually. So coming to our cardiologists, sir, how would you monitor these patients? How would you decide the frequency and what are the exact investigations you want to monitor for these patients depending upon the treatment? Dr. Mutia?
So in this given scenario where if we assume the baseline ECG is normal and baseline LV ejection fraction is normal, after commencing therapy, I think the first focus would be on making sure the glycemic and lipid control is within normal limits. And here, I think my targets for the lipids would be slightly different here. Rather than the normal targets for an LDL, I think we should be even more have an even higher threshold for LDL targets in this given scenario, especially with anti-androgen therapy, and similar with the glycemic status. Biomarkers per se, unless the patient has a new symptom or we find a change in the LVEF for a global longitudinal strain, a biomarker itself may not be. I know that the guidelines say that regular use of biomarkers, but I don't find in practice that a repeat of a biomarker, at least even within a given year, makes a big difference to the treatment. And I think it has to be tailored for each patient, because here we're talking about the toxicity. Especially with these drugs, the toxicities are so varied that you may feel that a certain patient is prone for one toxicity over the other. So if we feel the patient, for example, the hypertension risk is higher, I think we need to target that slightly more than the other risk factors.
Yeah,
And in terms of
Dr.
coronary artery
Shilendra,
disease, go ahead.
yeah, Dr. Shilendra, if may I ask you to come in, what is when would you want to add aspirin? When would you want to add statin? I mean, can you give us, oncologists a bit of sort of this, that when do you want us to add the aspirin, and what are those conditions when you want us to add statin to these treatments?
Depending on what, in this particular case, the case mentions that the patient is 70 years old with a PCI. So
let this case be there, sir. I mean, probably in this case we would have already these drugs added.
yes.
But let us consider a normal person who's normal, having normal workup. So when would you want to add aspirin? It is said that if you're adding aspirin, if you're adding statins, this can go into long term in preventing the cardiovascular diseases. When do you want us to add?
Usually, if they have dyslipidemia, and if they are using like this androgen therapy, antagonist or agonist, it shows that there's a chance that they have a higher low density cholesterol as well as triglyceride. So a statin would be indicated. But if they have no prior history of cardiovascular disease, and there are only 1 or 2 risk factors, I wouldn't really start on aspirin. But for long-term statin, usually calcium scoring would help. If they are not, they do not have any prior history and they don't have prior dyslipidemia, then I think if to consider long-term statin, I would usually get a calcium score.
Okay. Dr. Mutia, you want to add something? And what about the role? We think that if you're adding beta blockers, if you're adding ARBs, ACE inhibitors, the cardiovascular deterioration is less. It is seen with anthracyclines, it is seen with the anti-HER2 agents like trastuzumab. But in anti-androgen treatment also, do you think there is any role of adding beta blockers as a prevention strategy, or ACE inhibitors, ARBs as a prevention strategy?
I think the ACE-ARB class is mainly for drugs where we know they are going to cause a cardiomyopathy or a drop in LV ejection fraction. The evidence for the anti-androgens is not so much that they reduce the LVEF. So in terms of ACE-ARB, especially given that these patients may have a lower GFR at baseline compared to other patients, I'm not for adding an ACE-ARB in these patients. Beta blockers per se, unless the patient has, for example, an unstable coronary artery disease, I wouldn't, or an incomplete coronary revascularization, I would not start the patient on a beta blocker also. Just
okay,
as, for example,
aspirin and statins, sir, what is your opinion? I mean, you want to add to all of them, some of them, and when?
So if a patient is completely like I think my colleague mentioned, if the patient has no risk factors, our threshold for adding an aspirin or statin upfront would probably be very high. We are not going to add that directly. But if the patient has any risk factors or their CVD risk is at least 5% over the next 10 years, we may consider adding a statin for these patients. And these patients,
so
I think,
5% 10-year CVD risk, you would consider adding statin and
yes.
Aspirin, both, sir, or one?
Statin, I may, and based on the other comorbidities, for example, if the patient was a diabetic patient, we may consider an aspirin. But again, unless the patient has real evidence of coronary artery disease, I would stay away from aspirin.
That is exactly how I feel, because the current recommendation is moving away from
primary
as a blanket treatment for all that have this cardiovascular risk factors, because now we know that there is no now the data shows that there is no real role of aspirin if there is no real history of known cardiovascular acute coronary syndromes or something like that. So we try to avoid aspirin, but again there is this thing that sometimes there are patients who are already taking these drugs from some other cardiologists. In that case, I don't stop them unless there is like any bleeding or anything like that.
Okay. Sir, management of hypertension is patients. So patients on androgen deprivation therapy, we monitor, patients presenting with hypertension. So how to go about the management of hypertension? Dr. Mutia, sir.
Yeah. So
how
I
should we
think
manage the hypertension? What
I
should be
think
the class
the
of
goal,
drugs, first, second, third?
the goal blood pressure should be 140/90, and I think this is what is mentioned in a recent paper also regarding the monitoring of cardiovascular toxicity of these drugs in specific. So in terms of the drug class to choose, I think the first initial drug class can be either a calcium channel blocker or an ACE-ARB based on the EGFR clearance. And from there, a good second line drug to consider in most of these patients that we sometimes miss is a mineralocorticoid antagonist. Even 25 milligrams of aldactone may do a lot in this specific subset in terms of hypertension control. So ideally two drugs, and if it doesn't work, we can add a third drug as well.
Okay. Dr. Deepak, suppose this patient has cardiovascular disease, unmanaged glucose, unmanaged blood pressure. Would you be sort of omitting to remove the prednisolone from abiraterone?
Abiraterone is always to be given with prednisolone. The dose you can decrease, but there are studies which show that if you decrease the dose of prednisolone from 5 to 2.5 mg, then the outcome worsens. But if it is uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled hypertension, then you have to decrease the dose.
Okay. Dr. Krishna Kumar, sir, what would be your oncological management after the patient actually has a cardiovascular event? So suppose this patient was on abiraterone, or let it consider enzalutamide, and patient has a cardiovascular event. So how would you sort of want to treat this patient oncologically? So would you attribute it to enzalutamide and stop it, or would you want to change the androgen deprivation therapy? How would you go about the oncological management, sir? Dr. Krishna?
I think you're locked down.
Yeah. So Dr. Deepak, I think this is the last question because this is just the summary slide. So Dr. Deepak, patient has a cardiovascular event. Supposedly patient has a cardiovascular event on abiraterone. Would you change to enzalutamide? Would you stop abiraterone, or would you still continue it with the treatment
if the patient's disease is controlled on abiraterone and patient is having a cardiovascular event, I will continue abiraterone and leave the management of cardiovascular event to the cardiologist. I will not change.
Okay. Dr. Hemant, what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I would, first of all, what I would do is stop the hormonal therapy altogether. Let this cardiovascular, I'm not talking about just hypertension, I'm talking about a cardiac problem. Okay, and I would probably stop the hormonal therapy at that point of time. Let him be independently assessed by a cardiologist. If it's an ischemic event, whether that can be corrected easily by doing a PAMI or something like that, we see that. And there's no harm if you stop hormonal therapy for a period of 2 or 3 months. I've had patients where I've had to stop it even for 6 months and then restart the therapy. Because as you very rightly said right at the beginning, that a lot of these patients die of their cardiac problems and not of metastatic disease. So I think that also requires due importance.
Yeah. So I think this is a complex, sort of decision. We have to look at the disease pace. We have to look at, what is the disease load, and then we have to also look at what is the cardiovascular status. So, obviously needs again a very good coordination between the cardiologist and the oncologist to actually decide. So I think we have had a very good discussion, and I would ask Dr. Amit Joshi to finally sum up this as to what we can take the take home messages. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think in the end of the very fruitful discussion, what we can conclude that a close association between the cardiologist and a treating oncologist is required, and it is always advisable to have a cardiologist on board, and then the cardiologist should be aware of the what treatment we are doing, as it was mentioned by the esteemed cardiologist, both that the treatment may differ from the because of the pre-existing problems, the pre-existing lipid level. So I think the take-home message from this is that in the elderly patient where we are going to give the therapy, which is going to have some effects on this, we should involve our cardiologic colleague from day one, not at the time when the problem is. So they know the patient, and we can able to refer the patient, that particular person, in case of any problem. And regarding the toxicity, all this individualized approach, either abiraterone or enzalutamide, definitely the data for abiraterone seems to be the cardiac toxicity seems to be a little bit more compared to the enzalutamide, but definitely the individualized approach is the key answer in this situation. And I thank Vivek and all the panelists for this fruitful discussion.
Yeah, I think just there are some one or two questions I think we can address. So Dr. Raman Arora has asked, if there is atrial fibrillation or arrhythmia, then what should be the oncological management? So Dr. Deepak, what would you choose to give as the oncological management? If
Then enzalutamide will be preferable, and abiraterone has higher chances of AF and other complications, so I will prefer enzalutamide.
Okay, and another question is that a lot of these patients have a sequencing, and is there a specific sequence that actually impacts cardiovascular event? Dr. Amit, can you take this question?
Yeah, I think as such, I am not aware of any data regarding the sequencing per se from the cardiac perspective. From the oncological perspective, whatever we have learned, that the sequencing of abiraterone followed by enzalutamide vis-a-vis enzalutamide followed by abiraterone, the data for abiraterone followed by enzalutamide, at least the oncological outcome in an indirect way. So there is no randomized head-to-head comparison of abiraterone versus enzalutamide, either in a hormone-sensitive prostate cancer or CRPC. So whatever the indirect comparison which is there in the literature, the AbbVie followed by Enza, the oncological outcomes in terms of PSA control, in terms of PFS seems to be better. And in our practice, what we have learned over the year, the AbbVie followed by Enza, ultimately we have to sequence the therapy, and we have found this sequence is more more beneficial to the patient. So we feel that from cardiological perspective, I am not sure that is there any data available, but whatever the indirect evidence, it seems that abiraterone may be a little bit more cardiotoxic in terms of increasing hypertension, fluid retention, left ventricle failure. So from that point of view, probably abiraterone may be a culprit from that. The other, which I think, and at the end of the day, I think what you can do that just with the help of the cardiologist, we can frame at least the guidelines for a patient who has pre-existing cardiac problem, how to follow this patient, and one guideline, at least the consensus from among all of us involving the cardiologist, that those patients who do not have a cardiac problem, if we are starting in a metastatic patient, how frequently we should do 2D echo, do we need to do anti-pro-BNP at the baseline? So some sort of guidelines that will help the clinician and medical oncologist treating prostate cancer patients will be really helpful. Which hypertensive drug to be started? What will be the cutoff for a starting anti-lipid patient? So some sort of this will really help all of us. If you can do, and I'm ready to help from the oncological perspective if you need.
Yeah, I think it's a very good idea. So I think I'll wrap up this discussion, by thanking all of you. And one thing that just I wanted to tell all our attendees as well as the panelists is that under Asian Cardio-Oncology Society, we do have vision to sort of start up these guidelines as well as the local sort of registry. And I would request all those who have not yet taken membership of Asian Cardio-Oncology Society to please sort of take the membership of this. You can go to the website www.ecos.info for the membership, and very soon we are going to come up with our own Asian Cardio-Oncology registry, where we would like to bring up projects and collaboration projects among major centers in the SAARC countries to get on our data. which would also be sort of contributing to the global cardio-oncology registry data also. And very soon probably we are also going to come up with a collaborative clinical trial on cardio-oncology issues, and we would want sort of centers to participate to complete these studies. So with this, I thank you all for attending this event, and we'll see you next month again on the first Wednesday with another cardio-oncological issue and another meeting of Asian Cardio-Oncology Society. So thank you all. Good night. Stay safe and keep yourself and the family safe. Thank you.